Um,
Are we ready to start?
Is there waiting for Montek? Or they should indicate to you that you should begin.
Dr. Goswami, you can start.
Okay, I will take your. Okay. Good afternoon. Today we celebrate the memory of a remarkable human being, Isher Judge Ahluwalia, an economist, an institution builder, and those who know her well, a consummate networker for the greater good, a homemaker par excellence, loving wife, caring mother, mother-in-law, and a doting grandmother, who, in the throes of cancer and one of the worst forms of cancer, wrote her memoirs, a movable feast of a person who has traversed huge distances. With me to discuss the book and to discuss Isher are Montek Singh Ahluwalia, whose best qualification is that he was Isher's husband for 40 years, but he was also the deputy chairman of the Planning Commission. Professor Gopal Sabharwal, who was a former vice chancellor of Nalanda University and the faculty of the Lady Shri Ram College. Pranjul Bhandari, who is the chief India economist of HSBC, and my good friend TCA Srinivas Raghavan, who is a senior journalist, columnist, and a scallywag. So we'll start with Montek, if he's there. Is he there? Well, it seems not. So in lieu of, we'll get Montek when we will get him. Let's get.
Oh, he's coming in. Montek is here.
Hi, Montek. Just come a little closer to the camera.
Hi, Onkar. How are you?
I can only see half your face, and that's not nice because you have a good face. So come closer to the camera.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll start with you, Montek. We finished the introduction, and we'll start with you. If you can come closer to the camera a bit, then half your face will be
closer to the camera. Well,
come closer to the. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
That's good. Better.
You're right there. Right there.
Right over. Okay, fine. Thank you.
It's yours, Montek.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Onkar. I'm very conscious of being in a very unusual position, participating in this webinar. The book you're discussing, Breaking Through, by my late wife, Isher Ahluwalia, was published a little over a month before she passed away. The book documents the fact that she was suffering from ill health in the last several months. Had she been alive today, obviously I would not be participating in this webinar. At the same time, I'm very aware that I can't actually sort of represent her here. So I imagine that you're giving me a chance to say a few things from a perspective of someone who's not actually representing the author, but who was a life partner of the author for 5 decades. Now, that's also a very long time, so it's a pretty kind of difficult job to try and summarize in a few minutes the perspective that you have for 5 decades. But that's not what I'm going to do. I think I just want to highlight one or two things which might help people get a better sense of what Isher was actually saying or wanted to say in this memoir. The first point is that this book, the decision to write this book came rather late in the day, and it was done in very quick time because she knew she had limited time. As a matter of fact, I was working towards the very last stages of my own book, Backstage, and Isher was helping hugely in making comments on last-minute drafts of different chapters. And in that process, I mean, we were both economists. I was a sort of insider the government, as it were, putting across my perspective of how things look from the inside. And she was a policy economist from outside, always telling me, so what I was saying didn't seem all that credible and so on. It's very helpful, a critical interchange between the two of us. But at one stage, both I and our two sons said to her that, look, Mom, you have a different view on certain things, so why not write your own book? And I think that appealed to her, that maybe she should, in fact, write her own book. And although she knew her time was limited, she got down to doing it. And I think she brought to that all the determination and grit and the ability to get things done, which many people have commented on. So in some sense, I saw the idea of the book getting born, and also the book getting written. Now, as it was written, unlike what I was doing, she wasn't writing a book on the evolution of policy. I think she was giving her personal account of her life. And obviously, as a policy economist, there was a lot in it on how she saw policy and what it took to change policy. And in the very early stages, when we came back in 1979, the big issue really was the predominance of controls in the economy and the fact that we weren't doing very well. And her perception was that it was strange that this was not adequately recognized, even within the academic community in India. So I think her account of pitching into that debate is interesting because it gives people a flavor of what the debate was like at that time. And I think looking forward for younger people, I mean, most people are probably not interested in what the flavor of debate was in 1979 or 1980. That is, after all, a very long time ago. But I think what needs to be touched upon is that as a debate plays out, it's not always the case that things are very, very clear. And things which later on seem clear to many people are not very clear when these issues are actually being discussed. So I think it's interesting, her own, when she wrote her first book, she recounts the fact that, there were attacks from the left, that she was, as it were, mouthing a West liberal type of point of view, which is not actually a good description of her perception of things, although she was clearly saying that these controls have become far too inefficient. So that's one thing. Later on, of course, she went on to, she was quite determined not to work inside government. I mean, maybe I don't know whether one reason was that it's bad enough to have one person inside government, but she did recognize that if you're in government, then you have to use your opportunities to say what you need to say and persuade from the inside. You can't be in government and forthrightly criticize government at the same time, and that is a loss. And I think she greatly valued being outside government and being able to criticize government from outside. And I think that we need much more of that to have a useful debate, even today and looking ahead in future. So you need a lot more discussion of evidence-based policy. And this cannot be done if everybody wants to be inside the government, because the compulsions of what you have to say and how you conduct yourself, if you're inside government, are very different from what you would say when you're outside government. And I think that's...
Montek, I'm going to cut you in now and bring you into something else, all of which you said is quite important. But I want to bring you into something more personal, which is here was you St. Stephen's College chap, who then goes on to being a debater, goes to Oxford, becomes the president of the union, gets a congratulatory first, does his BPhil, and then moves on as a hugely read, very sophisticated Western person working in the World Bank. And then you met Isher in Washington. Tell us of your days of romance, and not about policy.
Well, by the way, I've said a lot of that in my book, so I'll only be repeating. I mean, I think,
You repeat.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, look, when you happen to be, in a way, both of us were in Washington, D.C., and from the very beginning, very early in our, I mean, I was the one who took the initiative, as I think her book brings out, to get in touch with her because a common friend had given me her name and had given her my name, but she hadn't actually got in touch with me, so I got in touch with her. And I mean, we clicked together very quickly. You can say that, two Indians with common interests meeting abroad, there's bound to be a lot of commonality and so on. But our personal connection had nothing to do with economics. I mean, we weren't clicking as economists. We were clicking as a young man and a young woman.
Okay, can we just move on? Montek, tell me, when do you want to exit?
Well, I have, I thought about 4:25, I have to get on to something else. So if you want me to,
let me do one thing. Let me do one thing. Just hold it till about 4:30 if you can, and let me bring in the others and then come back to you once more.
Okay, but I really need to break at 4:30. So why don't you bring me in?
Absolutely.
Bring me in at 4:25.
Yeah, I'll bring you in at 4:25. Can we move to Gopa, please? And whatever you wish to start with is yours.
Okay, so am I audible to everybody?
Yes.
All right, so I'm not the economist on this panel. I'm somebody who got to know Isher as a very young person, as neighbors in Pandara Park. And Isher became for me, I just entered the Delhi school. I was doing my master's in sociology. We were neighbors before we knew it. We started to walk together, and a large part of my relationship with Isher was dependent on our, evening walks or morning walks, talking about life. Uh, and she became for me very early on the role model of a woman academic who was successful, who ran this extremely efficient house, who took pride in her academic work. But much more than that, she was genuinely interested in what somebody as young as me, who was still at the MA, was planning, and how was I looking at my career. So for me, all of those initial years, and when you walk with somebody and you see them, at different times of the day and with a periodicity, you discuss a lot of the minutiae of life. You get to see somebody very closely. So we could talk about top of the mind things. She could interpret that world of academia for me, which I did not. I came, obviously, my dad is a journalist. My exposure was with different people. So Isha became for me, at a very young, important part of my life, I think, that role model that I was looking for, about how to become a successful woman academic, or to look at academia as a career. And I think she had also breached, I think what touched me, she was, even if you see breaking through, I was re-looking at the book the other day. The beginning was reminding me a little bit of like reading Little Women or something, a house full of girls, people, activity. But then there is this person in there who had a determination and ambition to do, to do well at whatever she was doing. She'd already moved, from Calcutta to Delhi to Boston. following her dreams. And I think that has been one of the most enduring, parts of what attracted Isha to me and to many other younger people is both the message that she continued to work or push in areas that she believed in, plus at a personal level, the kind of ethical person she was. But I think very, very importantly, and I have spoken to other people, she was genuinely involved and engaged in the lives of younger people.
I think,
It wasn't just, yeah.
Gopal, the amazing thing actually, and you've struck exactly the right note. The amazing thing about Isher, which I can never forget, is, you can be a very good academic, which indeed she was, and she wrote enough, and we can talk about that till the cows come home. But the amazing thing is how brilliant a home she ran, how much time and effort she took about on her children, how she ensured that she would be there and ready when Montek came home for lunch, which he used to, how she ran the entire hearth and yet never allowed one day to come in the way of her work. People don't understand how difficult that task can be of being an incredible housemaker, a homemaker, a wife, a mother, later a grandmother, and continue with academics and run an establishment, academic establishment. And she did all of it without missing a beat. And this is the most amazing thing about her. Can I just move on?
I mean, the boys were small in Pandara Park, and you know how kids are. They're at their chattiest best when they come back from school. If you don't see them between then and 5 in the evening, some of those stories will go away. They won't talk about. She made sure she was there every afternoon, have lunch with them, spend time with them, and then go back to work.
That's right. Can I just move on to? Can I move on to?
Sure, absolutely.
Let's go to Pranjul and then TCA. So Pranjul, your initial comments. So we'll do Pranjul, TCA, and then come back to Montek before Montek signs off. Pranjul?
Yes. Hello. Hi. So, great to be here in this very special event. Omkar, I wanted to touch upon some specific traits of Isher that really stood out for me. And also, my personal connect with her journey, with her as a role model for young women who really need to juggle a lot of different challenges. There is a raging debate, can women have it all? And generally, the debate is limited to two dimensions, career and family. I think what Isha did with her life was to bring in a third dimension of enjoying life. Can a woman have all three? Can she have a career? Can she have a family? And can she still have an enjoyable life where she really enjoys the finer moments of it? Let's go through them one by one. Career, definitely a successful career, a solid researcher, an institution builder in a career. Family, she had a wholesome family life, hands-on mother, loving mother-in-law, doting grandmother, wonderful partnership with Montek for many decades. Some very charming, simple rules of her life that come out so well in her book. For example, Montek and I have always kept a degree of separation when it comes to our work. And then later in her life, she actually left a career when she was at her peak because she wanted to go and spend some time with Montek in DC. But then through all of this, there's this great sense of enjoying life. The excitement she felt when she had her first dramatic haircut, her love for Indian art and sculpture, her diverse set of friends from around the world with whom she made a lot of effort to connect with. And then there's one example that stands out for me, after the 1991 reforms, when there was a lot of interest in India and she was being invited for conferences around the world to talk about the Indian growth story. She keeps writing about all the little dinners and lunches she had with her old friends, or all the little family holidays she took. Even at the heart of work, there was a great sense of enjoyment. So I think with Isher, she basically was able to have it all, and that too in the widest sense of the word. My own personal anecdote, when I met her for the first time, I knew her by reputation, a good economist. I was a bit nervous. I prepared to give, to sort of tell her a few smart things about the state of the economy. But I found that, a couple of minutes into our meeting, she steered the conversation into, who I really am and what are my aspirations, my ambitions, and of course gave me that motherly nudge that I should quickly have my children, which I subsequently did, but perhaps not as soon as she would have liked. I think she was a universal giver. In the first half of her life, she really uh, uh, benefited a lot from the largest of others. For example, some money she borrowed from Utsa Patnaik when she fell short of funds during university, when Professor Paul Samuelson paid her hospital fees, when the Kinkades, her host family in Boston, when she was a student, really looked out for her. And this is the same generosity she repaid in the second half of her life. As her son Pavan, spoke about her recently a couple of weeks ago, that she helped everybody with equal heart. It could be the maid's brother, or it could be a relative of the prime minister. It was with the same heart. Other thing that really stood out for me was her researcher come manager skills. I think one of the biggest tragedies I see around me is that many of the good thinkers are pretty pathetic at implementing, and many of the great implementers don't have great ideas. And here she was, she did both of them. In fact, if you look at some of her research topics, she chose some of the best topics out there, some of the most pressing issues out there. And then she was also a good manager, building up ICRIER, in its heyday.
I'll stop you right now. I'll stop you there, Pranjul, because again, you've caught on to a wonderful point, which is, without any exaggeration, it's very difficult to run a non-teaching institution. When you're in a teaching institution, you are teaching and doing research, and your students, especially if you have very good students, they enthuse you. When you're in a non-teaching institution, to make it have good people, to make it grow, to make it run properly is extremely difficult. And my take on this is, I don't think ICRIER would, ICRIER had possibly the best leader in Isher, and rare would a situation be where you could get a leader like Isher running a non-teaching institution. And on that score, can I move on to my good old friend, TCA Srinivas Raghavan?
Well, thanks, Omkar. This is slightly embarrassing to be talking about somebody I knew for 40 years, not very closely. We were not great friends as such, but we knew each other professionally. The first time I met her was in 1976 or 77, when she sent in her PhD thesis for publication, and it was an econometric model of India. And I said, bloody hell, somebody's doing this kind of work. So I said we should publish it. And you know how it is in publishing houses. The final say is with the marketing guys. So they said, oh, this won't sell more than 100 copies. So I said, you sell 100 copies, let's publish it. Tell me how much you'll price it at. And this went back and forth. And unfortunately, by the time the book could come out, I was transferred out of editorial. I was the economics editor. I was transferred out of editorial into marketing to see things from the other side. I don't know what actually happened to that book eventually, because Isher obviously doesn't seem to have received a copy of it. Though we did, I think, if I recall rightly, there was a contract of sorts. In fact, a Pakka contract with Macmillan. I don't know what happened to that book. I don't see it in their lists. And she also doesn't seem to think that it was ever published, which is why she says in her book that the one on industrial stagnation was her first book. But that piece of work was very, very original. It was the first time it was being done. We had published a book just a bit earlier called Behavior of Prices in India by Shanti Chakravarti, Shantiniketan. And but there was a huge difference in the quality of the two books. The second story that I quickly want to tell you, but Montek is still here, that this was at the Delhi School of Economics sometime in 2000 or 2001. Montek was chairing a seminar on one of the worst topics in economics, measurement of poverty. I mean, it was so horribly boring. And Isha was also there. And at one point she said, come and sit next to me, tell me all the gossip, because journalists apparently do know all the gossip, which I didn't. You make up some of it as you go along. But then I asked her, I said, Montek was wearing his trademark blue pug. And I said, tell me, why does Montek and Dr. Manmohan Singh, why do they always wear a blue pug? And she says to me, that's the best color for TV. And in fact, I have persuaded them to wear this blue. There are some photographs of Montek and, of course, Dr. Singh wearing white pugs also. But if you look at it after 91 or so, you'll find that their pugs are always blue. And I see that it is 16:26, so I'll stop here because Montek has to go.
Thanks. And I'll move on to thanks now. I'll move on to Montek. Montek, your comments before you sign off, wearing a blue sweater, a light blue shirt, and a blue pug.
Well, yes, it is my favorite color. I'm not sure I remember what the reasons were, but over time, it just did become my favorite color, and Isha strongly approved. So here I am, as you say, decked out in blue. Blue is not a bad color to be in, but I want to make just one point. What did I learn from my very long association with this? Clearly, personal front, I, more than anyone else, was the principal beneficiary of this whole, what people have talked about, of her being a wonderful wife, a wonderful mother, and homemaker, and so on and so on. But the interesting thing is that from the, and that's not a small thing, and it's really true. But in terms of policy making also, the thing I found very interesting in the later work that Isha was doing, particularly on urbanization, which I think is very relevant for anyone looking at India right now. And that is that it's perfectly possible for us to be a mess on a macro front, but with lots and lots of very positive things happening on the micro front. As she worked on urbanization, I mean, she came across the perception that at the macro front, we just weren't doing what needed to be done, either in terms of putting money into this area or devolving responsibility, etc., etc. And it was very easy to become very depressed. But at the same time, she would go around the country, and I think she published a book called Postcards of Change, and a subtitle, Postcards of Change, which documented individual stories of remarkable success. And I think that as people look at the Indian situation, at any given time, whenever you see something being an unbelievable mess, it's worth asking, are there individual stories of success which could later on be scaled up and become something good? And I think the nature of our system is such that, we're not very good at organizing ourselves across the board. I mean, unlike some countries which can simply define a national goal, lay out a strategy, and then everybody follows it. But in India, I think what we need to be especially looking out for are individual success stories, and try and learn from that. What is it that made this individual story a success? And policymakers would do well to think, how can we actually create a policy environment which would enhance the probability of such successes getting multiplied? And Isha was a great optimist, along with being a pessimist macroeconomically on the urbanization strategy. And I think that there's a big lesson there for us. And certainly as I look at things, I mean, it's something I keep trying to ask myself, look for the individual success stories and see how one could generalize them.
Thanks a lot, Montek. Thank you very much for being there. And I won't stop you. We really do care. We really did care for her. We will miss her and wish you the very best, my friend.
Thank you all.
May I move on to Gopal? We've got about another
Uh-huh.
20 minutes and then we take Q&A. So, Gopa, TCA, Pranjul.
Anything in particular you
Whatever
want me
you
to
wish to
focus
share.
on, or?
No, this is a free flowing thing, whether the book or Isha.
So, coming, if I pick up from, yeah, so if I pick up academically from what Montek was talking about, Isha's work on urbanization, I think that is also a very, it's not the characteristic academic arc that Indian academics would follow. I'm an economist, I work on policy, I do X, Y, Z, I'm building an institution. It is very rare for people to use their social science skill or training to then, at a later date in their career, try and engage with an area in which they've not engaged with at all. I mean, urbanization would technically be stuff that other people have been writing about, solid waste disposal, waste management, the column she ran. And I think it's remarkable that she had and that's something that is a sign of a robust academic, somebody who's not shy to embark on a new area of research. You're using your research you're also making new connections with people. And I think this idea of doing collaborative work, whether it's in the column she wrote, this idea, as Montek is saying, of economists are not people who generally went to fieldwork. In India, you were doing much more data crunching and big work. But to go out and discover these individual success stories, whether it is young administrators, whether it is NGOs, I think is a remarkable, a trajectory, and something that it should ideally inspire a lot of people to use their skill set to study other things. And for me, as a sociologist, that was an important shift that Isha made academically. In addition to everything else that she would do, it's the kind of rigor that she brought to stuff, whether it was, if I go back to one of our younger day stories, the summer she decided to learn how to ride a bicycle, and we tried every morning to get her she went and bought a bike, and she tried to ride a bicycle in Pandara Park and uh, make it happen. So I think she just had that kind of passion for life, to engage with things, and to not be afraid of change. And I think that's a very important, um, even the transition from being the economist to being the institution builder, and then from trying to grapple with becoming a full-time institution builder to also then working on urbanization. For the time being, I'll just stop at that, and then something else comes to mind.
Thanks,
We'll add
thanks,
it. Yeah, yeah.
Gopa. I'd like to go to TCA. The amazing thing about her was there was a period where, when she took over ICRIA, there was a period where she completely focused single mindedly to build the corpus of the institution. And man, did she do it. I mean, there are people who will tell you that she never let them go till such time as they opened their wallet for ICRIA. And it's only when she got the corpus to a level where the interest would take care of the running and do so well, that she then gave herself the time to go back into academics. So in a sense, her urbanization was late, because for a while she stopped all of that to build a corpus of an institution which was developed a name but didn't have the money. TCA.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Building ICRIER and the corpus there that occupied about 5 to 6 years of her initial years there. And I remember one day I was wandering around Habitat after lunch, and she was coming in and she said, "Come up, have a cup of tea." So we went up, and she started telling me, this was in 99, 2000, something like that. And By then, eCareer had, I hate to use the phrase, but it had pretty much been run into the ground. It didn't have money, it didn't have
Absolutely.
researchers,
People don't remember
and
that. Absolutely run
yeah,
to the.
it was pretty much a laughing stock. And I asked her, I said, why would you take up this thing? And there are other things to do. And she said, well, I started my research career here and so on. It was on that above the library. Oh no, what was that? Uh, just next to the kitchen where you used to get all the, in that career office, you would get the smell of butter chicken and stuff. Um, the She told me how all the sort of furniture was so sarkari from the planning commission days, and how the place looked completely. Why nobody wanted to join a career, because it's such a dowdy place. And of course, in order to do it up, you needed money. And I remember one dinner, sometime it was 2004 or somewhere, and these industrialist guys were there, and one of them saw her approaching and very quickly scooted, saying, "Yaar, paisa mangegi." So, which is, you're absolutely true. She left no pocket untouched if they had a bit of money which they could support ICREA with. And in the end, it paid off, because ICREA became one of the richest think tanks in the country. It has now a building also, which I must say that probably not a good idea to own your own building, because you need a lot of money to keep it going. Just the taxes are so high. But yeah, she managed to get the money in. Managed to get the people in, and she managed to make them work. And what more do you want from somebody who runs a think tank?
Absolutely, Pranjul.
Yeah. So, I wanted to touch upon some of her economic thinking, which is very clear, and also her book, which is also relevant today. I think Isher had a knack of picking out the most pressing problems of the day. And, some of the problems that she picked up then, are still relevant now. So one is the industrial policy. I think it's one of the biggest tragedies that we have in India, that our industrial sector is not able to provide good jobs to our labor force. The 1991 reforms, of course, made a lot of changes and improvements, but a lot still needs to happen in terms of factor market reforms, reducing bureaucratic controls and so on and so forth. A second topic, urbanization, of course, was also another great area which everybody has been talking about, and we're seeing the problem now even more than before. During this whole coronavirus period, the fact that we've seen such huge reverse migration of labor back to their rural homes is because these workers were not able to get the right amount of social security in their urban jobs. And the fact that today it's the urban poor for whom the government is not being able to do anything because there are no channels that have been set up. We have Narrated for rural India, but we don't have anything for the urban poor. So these were like important topics she picked up, well before anybody would have thought about their importance. One other thing that really struck me was her commentary on reforms. She made a very interesting point in her book about 1991 reforms. She believes that the thinking for the need of these reforms was very internal. It came from within the government. And it is very different from the kind of reforms we've seen thereafter. For example, the GST or the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, IBC, which have been driven more by external consensus. I believe that both the GST and the IBC have not yet lived up to their promise, to their growth promise, to the economy. And perhaps the reason is that there is the internal inspiration is lacking, the same internal inspiration that was there in 1991. So this another sort of point that comes out in her book. She also talks a lot about the contradictions, that were taught to her when she was studying economics in India. In her economic theory class, she was taught that import tariff works as an export tax. But during the same period, in her planning class, she was taught that it's possible for India to basically do both import substitution and export promotion at the same time. This contradiction has again resurfaced with this entire Atmanirbhar Bharat I think the government has sort of assumed that it can continue to slap economic tariffs and yet increase its share in global trade, something that has not been possible in the past. But again, we're back to that same sort of thinking. Let's see where it leads us this time. And finally, one last thing. She moaned in her books about the lack of the lack of importance for data and evidence. She talks about going to Professor Sukumar Chakrabarti with her second book, asking him to review it. But he said, no, I won't, because it has too many facts. And there she was wondering that some of these professors, they are ready to have all of these debates on air, but they don't want to they don't want to dirty their hands with facts and figures and numbers. And I think we see a form of that even now, when a lot of people have opinions, but not necessarily grounded in data and evidence. So a lot of sort of gems in the book in terms of also her economic thinking, which are very relevant today.
Thank you, Pranjal. I mean, the amazing, there are two issues. I mean, there's an issue for public consumption, where she was very careful with what she said. And there is an issue who would say something to TCA or to Gopa or occasionally to I and others, where she could say what she would have to say. And she had some pretty hard-nosed comments about lazy academics and some pretty hard-nosed comments about lazier policymakers. In fact, once, sometime before she got unwell, we were having a chat, and she said a simple thing. She said, come to think about it, the first 7 or 8 or 9 years of reforms was because of a small group of people who thought alike. They managed to get things done without too much legislative consent, and things happened. And but she said she was depressed about the fact that we always tend to get pulled back into a status quo ante and try and justify it. So just as you were talking about it, I mean, the lunacy of having higher tariffs and also having, try to have increase exports at the same time, Isher would quite correctly call it lunacy. She would politely call it lunacy. She would impolitely call it madness, but not too many people do that. And those who do are on the sidelines. I think perhaps one last quick comment if you want, and then we can go to Q&As if there are. Naru, do you want to comment? Quick one.
Well, she's absolutely right about reforms in the first few years, 6, 7 years, being made possible by people who were completely agreed on the agenda. But that the problem there was that the bulk of the reforms were focused on the financial sector.
Yeah.
And on the real sector, really not very much was done on the ground, except, of course, de-licensing. That helped. But the obsession of the governments and successive governments on inflation meant that the financial sector was treated in a particular way. Now, what happened after the 1996 inflation, 95 inflation, and all the Reserve Bank intervention and so on in 95 September, was that the government, actually, after having done 4 years of very serious financial sector reform, went back. And today, probably the financial sector is the least liberalized sector in the economy. And one of the shocking statistics there is that our credit to GDP ratio is just 50%.
Yes.
Shocking, absolutely. If you want to be a big economy, how do you function on so little credit? And that's because of financial repression.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Gopal, a quick comment?
Pass. We can go to questions.
Pranjal?
We can go to questions.
Okay. Can we get the questions in? I don't see any as of now, but can we get the questions in? Okay, so there is a question from Ajit Mathur. Ajit is in IIM Ahmedabad. And here's the question. Having known both Isher and Montek over a long period of time, And having worked as a colleague with both Isher at ICRIER and with Montek at the Planning Commission, I have read with great interest these remarkable memoirs. Well, there was a question to Montek, but he's not there, so someone else. Well, I don't even know whether anyone can answer that. Can care to recall any professional disagreements on economic policy with Isher and how you dealt with them? Uh, I don't think Montek is not there to answer it, and I'm sure there must have been professional disagreements in economic policy with Isher. Isher would have said it exactly the way she would say it, and Montek, of course, would know exactly how to do an Oxford Union debate on it. Then there is a question also from Ajit to Gopa. Do you recall any discussion with Isher on the problem of creating world-class universities? This is right up your street, Gopa.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I spent 6 years of my life in recent times trying to build Nalanda University. And, so clearly in that time, we did discuss how to build a university. But I think even before that, when when I took on I gave up my PhD fellowship to set up the Department of Sociology at Lady Shri Ram College. It was a big decision for me. And I think in many ways, I became Isher's window into LSR as an institution and as an institution that was truly coming into its own at that time. And I think we spent a fair amount of time discussing women's education, the importance of education. Over the years, the number of young girls she pointed to, she would always tell young boys in Delhi, oh, it's so sad you can never get to the best college in Delhi because it's a women's college. So she was not that impressed with Stephens. But she was interested. I think she was interested in the academia part of it, in how it's organized, what we can do to change things. She says in the same book, and we are suffering that right now, the power of giving needy students aid. I mean, how she herself, both in Calcutta and Delhi, if she had not had that scholarship, it would have been a different life story. So
The
I think
30
she
rupees that
was
took care of her tram.
that
The 30 rupees that took care of her daily
tramp.
tram journey. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's important. So I think, people she wasn't just somebody who waded through institutions or things like that. I think as you grow older, you're also looking. I remember when she took over ICRIER, and I told her that. I said, you just can't be an economist. I mean, you've got to give back. You have to build institutions. And we sat and talked about it one afternoon. And I think, I'm not saying I'm responsible for changing her mind, but she saw some merit in that argument. So I think, but she also knows, and we all know, change in India is slow to come by. Universities will and should be, government has to be involved. You've got to give to the largest number of kids. But these are complex issues, but yes, she was interested in them. Yeah.
The other amazing thing actually about reading this book, all of us who have read Isher have read Isher, you know, on her professional stuff. I mean, two books on applied econometrics, and then professional stuff on urbanization. Though it was it's not that the econometrics book were particularly difficult, but the urbanization books were an easier read compared to the first two books on econometrics, applied econometrics. But the amazing thing about this book, and which touched me to the core when I first got it not as a book but as a PDF, which touched me to the core, is the gentleness with which she wrote the book. I mean, you cannot. There are many things you can associate with Isher, but this easy, relaxed, gentle writing is something I couldn't think Isher would ever do, and she did that so brilliantly. Naru, you have a comment?
No, I think she left out a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did.
That's a weakness in the book. But then, under the circumstances under which she wrote, I suppose that's excusable. Not just leaving out her opinions of people, which could be very, very strong, but also things that happened about which she knew in real time, as it were. And it would have been very nice to have had a view of those, but then she wasn't well
Yeah,
after that.
well, you're right on that. She did leave out a lot, though there is. I won't mention the name. People have to read the book, but if there is one whiplash comment about a person, there is one in the book. Anyone who goes through it again, you'll know who it was. There's one gentle whiplash comment on that book. But I was expecting more, but everything was all very gentle and very beautifully written. I can't see any more questions coming up. Um, no, I don't think there is any more. There were Ajit's questions. There's someone called Surjit Sachdeva who said, you know, remarkable individual, highly respected in the UN offices here in Vienna. Her quality to keep contact with the younger generation, all of which is true, but none of which is a question. Um, uh, so perhaps it's 8 minutes earlier than the time. So maybe just conclude by your last comments, Gopa, Pranjul, and TCA, and then we can videographically bid adieu.
Um, okay, so I think I will go back to the book for a bit, and I do hope that it's an easy read. Yes, for those of us who knew her, but given the paucity of time and in which she wrote it, there are many, many stories I wish she had. There were a bit more detail about growing up. There's no sense of just the growing up, the fun, the fundamental ideas, whether it was faith, um, that quiet ambition to go out and do stuff. uh, I think there's a very important message there. The success story picture comes later, but I think it's a hugely inspiring book for any young person to read, uh, who may think that all of these people you see in New Delhi power circles, were born to the manner born, so to say. Here is somebody who's completely been upfront about, growing up in a three-room house with 10 other siblings, but having that quiet determination. At no point in that childhood or youth story is there a question of why me, and why didn't I get a better deal in life. You accept. There is a sense of it's stability. It's a state of mind which is, I've got to do the best with what I've got, and I'll take one step at a stage, and she's documented it. And I think for me that is a very important part of the story of how she's continued to live. And I think that window she has allowed a lot of people who may not have known her into her life via this book. So I'm really hoping that a lot of younger people
I really do
will
hope people.
read it.
Yep. I think to me, there's a very interesting turning point, and we can share it here. Is when Isha decided to stop dyeing her hair. To me,
Yeah.
that was a fundamental turning point. I mean, when Isha dyed her hair, you couldn't see a single little speck of white. And when she stopped dyeing her hair, it was absolute
Youth and
white as
white.
hair or mine. So it was a turning point. I mean, for her to do that. Pranjul?
Yeah, I wanted to touch upon a common thread that I shared with her. Both of us have some similarities. Both of us are Kolkata girls, grew up in Kolkata, playing in the neighborhood, the paras, singing Rabindra Shangeet, the classic Calcutta upbringing. And then we crossed the same seas thereafter. We both went to Delhi, to Boston to study, although I spent some time in UK as well. Both of us spent some time in IMF. And both of us actually got attracted to come back home and actually serve homeland rather than stay on in the US. So these are the similarities. But when Isha did it, it was much harder. And there are at least three big barriers she had to cross, which I didn't. The first one is language. She went to a Hindi medium school. Moving from Hindi medium to English medium is huge. I think there's a very heart touching story on how, in her Presidency College days, she used to make note of all the English words she didn't understand and in the evening look it up in the dictionary. What did it exactly mean? The second barrier was societal support to girls. I think very few girls were making the leaps she was making at that point. Today, nobody would bat an eyelid if, a woman heads a corporate, I think at least. Uh, and the third is the India she returned to. The India she returned to then had far fewer opportunities. And coming back, leaving a cushy, comfortable job in the US did require some guts. Uh, and in that sense, I feel that I walked the path which Isha cleared in some sense, and that is such a lovely thing, and I really enjoyed reading the book. The path needs much more clearing, I think, going ahead. I think many more glass ceilings have to be smashed, and we do need many more Ishas.
Absolutely. TCA, last comments, my friend.
Very, very, very quick 2 or 3 comments max. One is that surprisingly, the title of a book, it's the same title as Padma Desai's book, Breaking Through. So I was surprised how nobody pointed that out to her, that exactly a book with exactly the same title had been written by another economist from the Delhi School of Economics, and who's traversed the same sort of path, sort of course. Padma Desai didn't come back. Uh, the other thing is that, Omkar, I'm sure you don't know this, but I've written a novel 2 years ago,
Mhm.
and it's about publishing. You better buy a copy of it.
Okay, so
Um,
may
the
well,
no,
you may as well get some royalty, man.
it's brilliantly written and very boring. So, but you should read it. Um, in that, I have an economist who comes from the US with a manuscript, and in part, that character was modeled on Isher because we in our office, whenever twice or thrice or 4 times that she visited, we knew that she had come because the perfume that she wore from the US would float up the staircase and everybody would know, you are gay hai, madam. And final point, I one of my great regrets has been that I was asked to review her first book, 84, and I was still a callow youth, wet behind the ears, and I wrote rather nasty things, I'm afraid. And as a result, we weren't very good friends for a fairly long time. In fact, we didn't speak to each other for about 7 or 8 years, or rather, she didn't speak to me. But that's one of the lasting regrets that I have, that I should not have said that the book was inconsequential because, in fact, it was a very good book, in fact, to tell. So that's about it, Omkar.
Thank
I
you very
can't
much.
believe she's not there, She was
It's
so much a
difficult.
part of the
Yeah.
Delhi economic scene.
It's very difficult to believe that she's not there. It's very difficult to believe that she is not sitting with her pallu exactly the way only Ishar would have her pallu, right? It's very difficult to believe that it's difficult. It's extremely difficult to believe that she's not there. But thank you very much. It's 4:59, and thank you for all the care and affection that each one of you has shown to this lovely woman who, other than writing very competent books, wrote this one, which is so heartwarming and so touching. Thank you very much, and we will close the show right now. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. I'm glad we did this.